So let's take a look at some of the stories that dominated headlines in the week. Is Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute Research Director, Angelo Fick. Angelo, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. So let's start with the situation between President Cyril Ramaphosa and Tourism Minister Lindiwe Sisulu. What does it mean when someone who's taken an oath of office as an MP and Minister of State to protect the Constitution pens such an opinion piece?
Well, one has to ask whether people take their oath seriously, because if you're meant to protect the Constitution, mounting an attack on the Constitution cannot simply be defended as freedom of speech. Most of us, the rest of us who are citizens, can critique the Constitution, but if you're a Minister of State, you have a slightly different position, and your public opinions do not simply count as public opinions on your own. They also count as comments coming from a member of state, and therefore can be read and perceived to be party policy. We cannot also have these kinds of public spats between members of cabinet, as we've seen in the Sisulu-Lamola exchanges. And this is not just about unity of government, this is about stability of government. Those kinds of debates should be had internal to the cabinet, and then there should be one statement from government coming about what its official position is. If Lindiwe Sisulu wants to write in her personal capacity, then perhaps she should vacate her position as Minister of State. And this counts for many other ministers who make similar kinds of remarks off the cuff and in public spaces where they think they speak as private citizens, but actually it's one of the costs that come with taking on the mantle of Minister of Government, that you somehow have to give up your ability to simply hold forth your private opinions, because everything that you now say in public counts as a comment on and a reflection of government policy and government position.
The remarks, what do they reveal about the understanding of the structure and the form of government by a long-standing member of the ANC, NEC?
Well, as Paulo Jordan pointed out to your viewers earlier in the week, this is indeed a problem. If you've been part of the structure that gave us this constitution, the governing party and its negotiated settlements of the 1990s, if you've served in administration after administration, first as an MP and then later on as a member of the cabinet, it's very interesting that you should suggest that all of the structures that you've put in place as a party and as a government has somehow failed to deliver, because that's an indictment of your party, not of any of the mechanisms that you seem to be critiquing. And so Ms. Sisulu has to account for not only that aspect of this, but also secondly, there seems very little reflection in the pieces that she's written about how the judges are appointed, that they're not just appointed from some abstruse process that none of the rest of us are aware of, that there's the Judicial Services Commission, there are parliamentary structures in which she could have raised the issues that she raises in the original opinion piece, and there are also ways in which she could have done this through the NEC as a member of the governing party. But the fact that this is raised in an open letter to the Republic of South Africa's citizens seems to be an odd maneuver for a Minister of Government to be doing. And however much she may have signed the piece as Lindiwe Sisulu in her private capacity, as my first response indicated, it's not really possible for Ministers of Government to have these kinds of private views aired in public without affecting our perception of government position, and certainly of the executive administration's internal squabbles that really don't do well to give citizens a sense of certainty that government has a direction and a vision that it's taking, and that everybody has come to that vision. The third problem is, of course, that in an organization that believes in democratic centralism, it is odd to be taking this kind of position outside of any of the structure of that organization into the public domain to debate issues that really should be debated at first inside those structures.
Is there any substance to her critiques?
The way in which the critique is written, it is so easily and has been so easily dismissed by many observers as pure nonsense because it's so badly written. But that's not necessarily to take away from the fact that there are very many factual aspects of that critique that remain true. So yes, in some respects, there are issues with equality of access to justice. In theory, on paper, that's supposed to be the case in the Republic of South Africa. But we know that class plays a major role in determining who gets to appeal and who does not get to appeal. Think of the number of political elites who've been able to stay their day in court by endless appeals, over years, and, first as ministers, as members of the government, and later as private citizens, being able to call upon networks to fund that. And think of the ordinary citizens who may go through a magistrate's court in 3 afternoons and find themselves encumbered with fines and or imprisonment. Think of those ordinary people in 2010 who had 45 minutes between arrests outside of a football stadium and being imprisoned for up to 3 or 5 years. So the idea of justice and its equality comes into question. And so, Ms. Sisulu is correct in pointing that out. She's also correct in various other critiques that she lays at the society that we live in for not really fulfilling on the promises of a post-apartheid vision. But having been part of the mechanisms that has built post-apartheid South Africa, the irony is that they reverberate back upon her and her responsibility in those administrations, in that party, in that organization and its structures for delivering the very thing that she critiques. And so the open letter may not have been to these ordinary citizens of South Africa, but may have been to her party. And secondly, laying blame at the judiciary may have been a misdirection for what is at fault inside the governing party of the post-apartheid Republic of South Africa.
So then what? Is this a matter of freedom of speech?
I don't think it is, as many people want to protect Lindiwe Sisulu's freedom of speech. Freedom of speech comes with consequences, and they come with certain kinds of, shall we say, preconditions. And one of the preconditions is that you cannot use your position in government, step aside from it to critique the very position that you've held and still hold it. If you disagree with an organization's performance and its maneuvers, you should resign from that organization. It is, after all, what all of that debate about voting with your conscience in Parliament was about. And every 5 years in national elections and every 5 years in municipal elections, ordinary South Africans are asked to vote with their conscience. If Ms. Sisulu's conscience is such that she critiques and finds the Constitution unacceptable, she has every right to do so. But you can't continue to serve in government where you've taken an oath of office to uphold that Constitution and protect it, and at the same time critique it in the lambasting terms that she has done. That smacks to me of not just wanting your cake and to eat it, but also to flush it away at the same time. This is not really a matter of freedom of speech. That's a misdirection. Everybody has the right to do so, but if you critique the system of which you are a part, you should be willing to give up the position that allows you privileged space inside that system that you wish to abolish. And a Minister of State, as I've pointed out before, we really have to come to terms with this in South Africa. Doesn't really have a private capacity to make public statements. The minister's private capacity is in her private life and in her private circle. Any minister who makes remarks in public, whether they're published in what used to be newspapers but are now websites, or whether they're doing it in television or radio interviews, those are public remarks, and they will be taken as reflections on and reflections of policy. Private remarks are, unrecorded moments that you have in your private life. Every public remark, every public statement, even when made by private citizens, have, public consequences. Like my statements here will have public consequences. I should be able to defend them. If the Minister of State is willing to put those remarks on record, she should do so as the Minister of State and not in some disguised, masked private capacity. Because then, it makes a mockery of the idea that ministers of state, given what we pay them, should speak policy and not in their private capacity.
See that this sets the tone for the rest of the year, especially ahead of the elective conference in December. What should we make of the timing of this?
Well, we've all lived through 2017 and we all lived through 2012. Presumably we'll have to live through 2022. If this is January, one can only imagine what pathetic aspects of this internal conflict that is supposedly a leadership contestation will serve up. The irony, of course, is that the African National Congress can ill afford to have a repeat of 2017 and the divisive campaigning that we saw in that year, which led to an almost down-the-middle split between factions in the party in the NEC and also in the top 6 officials. The consequence of that is that we now sit with the top 6 official being suspended from the party in the position of the Secretary General, Mahashule. The party cannot have those divisions in this year ahead because that will result in divisions in 2023 in the party ahead of the 2024 elections. Given its 2021 performance in local government elections, it cannot bank on the fact that it will repeat its 2019 general election victory and not sink below 50%. The internal integrity of the party may be something that the NEC would have to look at if it wishes to survive 2024 more intact than it had 2021. And this, I think, must be uppermost in the minds of people in the NEC, because after all, your position on the electoral list, given the system of representation in South Africa, will determine whether or not you make it into a position in Parliament or in the provincial legislatures, and that has consequences for the patronage network that the party has as central to the way in which it runs. And it's not simply an issue faced by the African National Congress, it's an issue faced by all political parties in this country, that they need to get a larger percentage of the vote in 2024 in order to make sure that larger numbers of their top officials get into the provincial and national legislatures, and by that means maintain the kind of income that often these parties require, particularly given the changes in political party funding, and the ways in which certain kinds of funding will no longer be available to them. And so, yes, it's going to be, I think, a difficult year. People like you, storytellers in the media, will have to make very tough choices about which are significant issues to discuss and which are not. And I suspect that Minister Sisulu or Ms. Sisulu's salvo this early in the year may have been an early misfiring, and much lies between, January, whatever today's date is, and December, the day on which the election will happen inside the ANC, to decide whether Cyril Ramaphosa remains leader of the party or whether his challengers can triumph over him.
Angelo Fick is the Research Director at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. We appreciate you availing yourself this afternoon. Happy Sunday to you.